Hey everybody, Pastor Joshua Vi here. I am really excited to share in this online Bible study. We normally hold it on Monday nights at 7 p.m. Unfortunately, due to a error that was beyond our control, our Mac that we use to record and broadcast these Bible studies, unfortunately suffered a little bit of a mishap. And thanks to the good people at Apple, they were able to get us right back up and running. And rather than postpone or put off a week, we just decided to hold it tonight on Wednesday. And so whether you like to follow along with us live or whether you like to watch it at some point during the week, you'll have this week's Bible study. And then also want to encourage you to check out a really neat new resource, which is our accompaniment Bible study guide that is produced by my colleague and associate Christian Bass. He takes the same section of scriptures and he puts together a guide for either small groups or personal Bible study, and we'll be publishing that tomorrow. So if you would like to kind of have two perspectives on this study, we'll be bringing that to you as well. Want to encourage you tonight to turn over to Luke chapter 17. That's where our text is going to be, Luke chapter 17. And while you're turning over there, I want to remind you that we are from Christian Community Church of Fullerton. We meet every single Sunday at 11 a.m. Sunday worship begins at 11 a.m. every single Sunday. We would love for you to join us if you're ever in the North Orange County area. And I'll put our website up here, or our physical address up here in case you would like to do so. We're located at 3635 West Valencia Drive in the city of Fullerton. And that's right up there. So come on out and join us anytime you're in the North Orange County area on a Sunday morning. We would just love to have you join us. And you can find out more information on joining one of our live services or events at www.c3fullerton.com, which is where most of you join our Bible study anyway. www.c3fullerton.com. We've got a lot of exciting events coming up, including a great Christmas sermon series that is going to begin in 2 weeks. So we would love for you to join us. And also, if you are not in the area but you would like to join our worship, we live stream our Bibles or our Sunday morning message every Sunday right around 11:30 a.m. If you log on to www.c3fullerton.com at 11:30 a.m. every single Sunday morning, you'll catch our Bibles or our sermons live, excuse me. And if you join us on Mondays at 7 p.m., you'll tune in for our online Bible study. And pray for me because I'm having a little bit of difficulty talking tonight. Luke chapter 17, which is where we are. We're a few minutes away from 7 o'clock, which is where we'll get started. A couple things I want to share with our group as we've been going through these online Bible studies. We want to make this as inclusive as possible. And the best way to do that is for you guys to be able to reach out to me, to be able to be in contact with me. And there's a couple things that I'm looking for. If you have a topic idea or maybe a scripture that you would like to see us go through and study, I am always open to suggestions. I lead a live Bible study, a small group Bible study in the city of Temecula, California on Tuesdays. And what we do is different members of the group will propose a place for us to study, and we'll do that. On Sundays, if you follow along with our messages, you'll find that we do a lot of message series where we either go topically or through the Bible and look at a lot of different parts of the Bible as a collected work. And on these online Bible studies, we really want to go topic by topic. And so if you have a topic that you are really interested in, hearing what the Bible has to say about that, please reach out to me. I would love to hear that. And the other thing I would like to encourage you to do is send me your prayer requests. We would love to have them. We promise that we're not going to publish them online for everybody to see or hear, but we as a church would just absolutely love to be your prayer warrior. And so I'm going to put up my information right here. the best way for you to reach me is at my email, which is pastorvi@yahoo.com, pastorvi@yahoo.com. And if you get in touch with me there, you'll be able to contribute to this Bible study as well as share your personal prayer requests. Or maybe you just want to drop a line, and I'd be happy to hear from anyone that is participating and supporting this ministry and this online Bible study. So again, that's pastorvi@yahoo.com. And if you have any suggestions, prayer requests, we promise we're not going to publish them for everyone to see, but we would love to be supporting you in ministry. And so without further ado, let's look at Luke chapter 17. And the topic tonight is gratitude. What an important topic. Again, we did not plan to do our Bible study tonight. We usually do it on Mondays, but here we are on this Veterans Day doing this Bible study, and it's very appropriate in our country where our ministry is located, the United States of America, as we consider the topic of gratitude, to do it on this Veterans Day. This day stands apart not because it's a great day to buy a mattress, and not because it's a great day to pack the mall and take advantage of the sales. I know all those things are there. Those are good things. If you need a new mattress, if you've been sleeping on the same one for 8 years, probably a good day to go out and buy one. But this day is so much more than just another sale. And it's so much more than just a day off of school. This is a day where we take pause and honor our veterans, those who have fallen, and those who continue to serve, and those who have served. Because nationally, they make a great sacrifice. They put themselves in harm's way. They're this special minority in this country that go out and serve the whole, and they keep us safe. And in this country, they keep us free to exercise what we're doing right now. One of the rights that we have in this nation is to assemble, which we're doing in an online way. We're assembling through the internet, and we're sharing our ideas freely without fear of retribution from a government or from another organization. The other thing we're doing is we're practicing our faith in this country. Regardless of what faith you have or hold, you have the right to practice that freely, as long as it doesn't infringe on the safety or well-being of someone else. And all too often, that is taken for granted. There are still nations in this world and corners of this world where such freedoms just do not exist. And we know that we didn't gain these freedoms. They weren't just given to us. They were fought for on battlefields of blood. And so for me, Veterans Day is a reminder of all the brave men and women who serve in a uniform or who have served in a uniform. And the most pure intention is to continue to keep our priorities as a country moving forward. And there is no greater priority in this nation than the freedoms that we find in our U.S. Constitution and Bill of Rights. Now, understand, we're broadcasting all over the world through YouTube, and we realize that this may be going out to everyone, and some of the things I've said might not matter that much to you. Maybe you're in our country and that doesn't matter as much to you. And certainly, we put the New Testament first. We put our beliefs as Christians first, and we in this church and in this Bible study, we try not to actively intermingle anything like politics or U.S. priorities and Christian priorities. I just want to recognize that we cannot talk about gratitude tonight on Veterans Day without acknowledging how grateful we should be for those who have answered the call to service. And they're not just serving our nation and our interests, but in many cases, they're serving the interests in nations abroad. And it is really quite an amazing thing. And I'm grateful for it, and I hope you are too. So as we think about gratitude, I think it's a very, very appropriate day to consider that. Luke chapter 17, verse 11 is where we're starting. We're going to go through this very extensively. It's just a few verses, this story, and so we're going to look at every single part of this. So I'm going to read it through once, and then we'll kind of go verse by verse, and we'll talk about this from a narrative standpoint, what's going on. Now, on his way to Jerusalem, Jesus traveled along the border between Samaria and Galilee. As he was going into a village, 10 men who had leprosy met him. They stood at a distance and called out in a loud voice, "Jesus, Master, have pity on us." When he saw them, he said, "Go show yourselves to the priests." And as they went, they were cleansed. One of them, when he saw he was healed, came back praising God in a loud voice. He threw himself at Jesus' feet and thanked him, and he was a Samaritan. Jesus asked, "Were not all 10 men cleansed? Where are the other 9? Has no one returned to give praise to God except this foreigner?" Then he said to him, "Rise and go. Your faith has made you well." What a powerful story. Powerful for many reasons. First and foremost, for the miracle that Jesus performs. That's one thing that always stands out to us when we look at these stories of Jesus' miraculous power. It's just the fact that Jesus is able to do these signs and wonders. But we know from the other gospel writers' writings that Jesus did incredible works. He did many of which that never actually made it into any of our 4 gospels. Here is a story that only makes it into Luke's. And so we know that the gospel writers, Luke included, is writing these stories in for a specific purpose. And right out of the gate, Luke kind of gives us an idea of what his purpose is. Luke has a common theme that he employs in his gospel, many of them, one of which is the literary device on the way to Jerusalem. Luke will write this a few different times, and it represents a shift in which Jesus has been conducting his public ministry. He's been healing people. He's been teaching. He's been talking about the kingdom of God. He's been forgiving sins. And he's been kind of getting into conflicts with the Pharisees from town to town in the region of Galilee. Well, for Luke, there is a clear shift where Jesus begins his journey to Jerusalem. And Luke is obviously writing after the facts of Jesus' life, death, and burial, and resurrection. So whenever Luke employs the line "on his way to Jerusalem," Luke is reminding his audience where Jesus is going. Jesus is not just going to Jerusalem. Jesus is going to his death. Jesus is not just going to the city of David. Jesus is eventually going to be thrown out and taken to the hillside of Golgotha. Jesus is not just going to celebrate the Passover. Jesus is going to institute on the cross and in his resurrection an act that will impart salvation to all men and women. So that's what Luke is trying to remind the audience and the listeners, that Jesus is a man on a mission. He's a God man on a mission. And so when we read that line, it's just kind of supposed to jolt us awake to the fact that Jesus, every step he takes, is a step closer to fulfilling what only he can fulfill. And so these acts and these words, they're his last acts. They're his last words. And like anyone's last acts and words, they have special meaning. And this one in particular has a little bit more information, a little more details. It says that Jesus traveled along the border between Samaria and Galilee. Now, one of the things that we've got to understand about the makeup of Palestine, that's the general nation where Jesus lived, is it was composed of different regions. There was the southern region where Jerusalem sat, where Judea was. Jesus actually spends very little of his ministry there. He's born in Bethlehem, but he comes back to the hometown of his father, Joseph, where he has his carpentry business, and that's Nazareth. So Jesus spends most of his life and most of his ministry in the upper region of Palestine, a place called Galilee. And in Galilee, there's several different cities, all kind of situated around that lake, and they're all there depending on one another for trade and for everything from food and agriculture. And it's a very rich and bustling area. And Jesus happens to come from one of the smallest towns in that region, Nazareth. And he spends quite a bit of his time in ministry in one of the larger areas, which is Capernaum. If you go to Capernaum today, it's even known as the unofficial hometown of Jesus, because in the Gospels, Jesus spends so much of his time there. So as Jesus is leaving this area where he has a major kind of status, celebrity status for all the things that he's doing, he's going down, he's taking this trip down to Judea. Now in Judea, Jesus was extremely well known. A few chapters, if you go a few chapters from here, you can read about Jesus being received in the city of Jerusalem. There was much fanfare when Jesus first entered that city of Jerusalem, according to Matthew, Mark, and Luke. But he was not nearly as understood in that southern region of Palestine as he was in the north. So why am I bringing this up? I'm bringing this up because as Jesus was traveling from the area that he spent most of his life and time to the area of Judea and to Jerusalem, people were maybe for the first time really getting a look at who Jesus was. Now, let's use an example that is going to pale in comparison to Jesus, but might be something that we can kind of wrap our minds around. Have you ever been to a sporting event where a very famous athlete from another town was coming to play your team? And this was the first time, and maybe one of the only, if not the only time, you ever actually got to see them live. Of course, you were going to root for your team, but think about the excitement of seeing that player. Maybe you go back a few years and you can remember when Michael Jordan played, and when he would come for us in this area, he would be coming to play the Lakers with the Clippers. And the excitement of seeing one of the all-time greatest play. Just recently, the Lakers traveled to play at Brooklyn. And for those of you who follow the NBA, this may or may not be, but probably is Kobe Bryant's last season. And one of the things that struck commentators as they were watching this game was how many people who dressed up were in Laker garb, and how many people, even in Brooklyn Nets garb, were rooting for Kobe. The significance of having this player come into their arena was not lost on this crowd. And the same thing has happened when a great Super Bowl winning quarterback will go into a city, or maybe a great baseball player will visit. We've seen this time and time again in sports. Maybe you can remember a time when a very important political figure visited. Just recently, the Pope visited the United States and spent some time in Washington, D.C., and New York, and Philadelphia. Of course, there were so many people lining up just to see if they could get a glimpse at the Pope. More than one person has been lining up to see if they can get a glimpse at one of the candidates for president on the Republican and Democratic sides, and huge crowds and people taking selfies with the candidates. And of course, just think if that person went on to be president, you had a selfie with the president of the United States. It would be absolutely extraordinary. Now, these are just regular people that I'm talking about. They might be great athletes, and they may be successful politicians, and you know, they might have a certain celebrity status, but the fact of the matter is they're just people. But you can probably remember a story like that. Imagine what it must have been like to hear that Jesus would be traveling by your town or your village. Imagine all the people who were going out as Jesus was making his way in his caravan of apostles towards Jerusalem. And understand, Jesus wasn't driving by in a Pope mobile. Jesus wasn't taking an airplane. Wherever you went, you either rode on horseback, camel, or walked. And from what we understand, Jesus did a lot of walking. So this trip from this northern area of Palestine to the southern area of Judea, this would have been quite an amazing journey. And people would have been coming, pouring out in the streets if they heard that Jesus was going to be coming to their town. I mean, just imagine what that must have been like. And it's out of this atmosphere that a very interesting thing happens on the border between Samaria and Galilee. That kind of gives us a clue into what Jesus is doing as well. You see, there's a tension between some of these different regions. And in particular, there's a tension between the region of Samaria with that of Galilee and Judea. See, Samaria kind of sits in between. But most Jews who were traveling between the northern end of Palestine and the southern end would go around Samaria as to not pass through it. And the reason why is they viewed the Samaritan people as somewhat of outcasts. They were not pure Jews. They were not up to their standards ethnically. The Samaritan people probably spoke with a bit of a different dialect and probably had a different skin tone. But even more importantly, in the minds of the Jewish people, they traced the Samaritan people's heritage back to a time when Israel was occupied. And there was kind of an intermingling between the occupying culture and the culture in Israel. And so for Israel, or for the Jews who were living in Palestine, what was ancient Israel, they saw these people as not purebred Jews. And so we see the racial tensions all throughout the Gospels between the Jews and the Samaritans. And Jesus is constantly pointing out that this line of thinking is completely inappropriate. One of the most famous stories that Jesus tells that you might remember is the one called the Good Samaritan, where a man who's traveling, falls at the hands of robbers, is beat half to death. Two people of a religious sort in Judaism walk by the man and pass by, unwilling to help him. The third man who comes upon him is a Samaritan, nurses him back to health, and leaves enough money at an inn for the man to be nursed back and to be made well. This is what Jesus refers to as loving one's neighbor as you love yourself, and he gives that honor to Samaritan. Another famous story is when Jesus actually enters a Samaritan village, and he actually has a conversation with a Samaritan woman, and the conversation goes so far that she actually receives forgiveness from Jesus, and salvation comes to her household. She becomes really one of the first people in John chapter 4 to go out and proclaim the gospel of Jesus. The idea that Jesus, who was Jewish, would spend his time on the way from Galilee to Jerusalem and Judea, walking along different towns that belonged to both Galilee and Samaria, was a big deal. Would have been very controversial, and honestly would have added to some of the rumors and some of the disgusting views that people in Judea had about Jesus, those people who eventually saw fit to kill him. So, what does that mean? It means this: Jesus didn't do anything by accident. Everything that Jesus is doing is purposeful because he's on his way to Jerusalem, Luke tells us. And as he goes, he's purposely going to areas that had somewhat of a stigma about them. Because for Jesus, that's important. It's important for Jesus to bring the good news of the kingdom of God to both the haves and the have-nots, to the Jewish thoroughbreds and to the half-breeds, to the dogs, as the Jews would have seen them. When I think about the state of our country and our world, so many refugees displaced from their homelands, so many immigrants coming from one nation of nothing to a nation that they hope will have a brighter future for themselves, even more importantly for their kids. When I think about some of the racial tensions that we've been reading about in the news, especially some of the most disgusting things that have come out of a prominent university just recently, some of the stories of just genuine prejudice and oppression, it is extremely comforting to know that at the very foundation of Jesus' message was the idea that all people were equal and important to listen to it. And that's why we have interactions in the Gospels of Jesus with not just the Jews and Jewish leaders, but the working class. I mean, why did Jesus spend so much of his time in northern Palestine and not in Judea and Jerusalem, where the center of Jewish life was? Because most of the working class, most of the blue-collar Jews lived in northern Palestine. Jesus, he led a ministry where he was constantly around those who needed that hope and salvation most. But Jesus didn't just go to the Jews, he also had interactions with those who were not Jewish. And if you think the Samaritans were mistreated or misthought of by the Jews, those who were not Jewish were treated even worse, were thought of even worse. The Gentiles had the reputation amongst some Jews that they were nothing more than just dogs, animals. And then we have Jesus who interacts with Samaritans. It's extremely comforting to know in the year 2015, when we're still seeing prejudice rear its ugly head, that we worship a God that seeks to bring down these walls and end this kinds of oppression and prejudice that we place upon each other. It should humble us. It should move us to want to act like Jesus. We should be looking for ways in which we can bring hope to people who don't share necessarily our class and order, not necessarily has our same last name and skin color and language. We should stop looking at our fellow man as aliens, as people from far off places, and start looking at them as our brothers and sisters. It's the kind of ministry that Jesus led. And here's the thing. When we talk about gratitude, you can't really be a grateful person if you have hostility in your heart towards anyone. Gratitude can't be compartmentalized. If we're going to be grateful to God for all the amazing things that he's done for us and the salvation that he's given, we can't then turn around and have hatred and discord in our hearts towards our brothers and sisters. And the fact of the matter is, the person, the human being that you come into interaction with, that is your brother and sister. That person is made in the image of God just as you. And Jesus went to Jerusalem and died on the cross for that person's sins, just like he did you. So where does gratitude start? It starts with taking on the mindset of Jesus, being willing to go and interact with whoever comes in our path, and accepting people warmly and gladly, just as he accepts these 10 people. Now it says he was going into a village, and 10 men who had leprosy met him. And they stood at a distance and called out in a loud voice, "Jesus, Master, have pity on us." If you're familiar at all with the New Testament, and particularly the first century, you'll note that this was a horrid disease to have. And really something that we just kind of got a handle on in the last couple hundred years. Doctors have just recently, relatively with history, were able to cure this disease of leprosy. And from time to time, it still pops up when people travel to third world countries or places where the disease can be found. But for the most part, in the developed world, it's eradicated, and it's certainly something that's treatable. They couldn't have imagined that then. This disease ravaged this whole area for thousands of years. I mean, this disease, this horrible affliction, it even goes back to the time of Moses, when in the Jewish law they had to come up with ways in which they could contain it from spreading. And one way was for those who were afflicted to go and live in colonies with like-minded or like people, people who were also afflicted with this ailment and disease. If they ever did journey into a place that wasn't a leper colony, they would have to wear bells, and they would have to let down their hair, and they would have to actually shout and proclaim that they were unclean so as to not accidentally or purposely infect anyone else. Truly, it's a horrible thing. Just imagine growing up and being afflicted with this horrible disease. And as you're imagining that, think about it. You would lose your family. You would lose your home. You'd lose your business. You'd lose your livelihood and your life. Everything would change. You would really become the living symbol of pity and desperation. And while you're imagining that, think about people who are living through that today. Thankfully, due to medical breakthroughs, we can keep people who are afflicted with cancers, HIV/AIDS, diabetes, heart disease, a lot of other horrible afflictions. We can keep them living longer. In many cases, even give them a good quality of life. But the fact of the matter is, there's still stigma attached to all sorts of diseases. You know, sadly, obesity and diabetes is on the rise in the United States, and still there's such a horrendous outlook on a disease that affects so many. Certainly with HIV/AIDS, going back to the late 70s, early 80s, when it was discovered, and fear just swept around this disease that was killing people seemingly instantaneously, watching people kind of live with a death sentence and waste away. Fear and mistrust crept around certain communities in the United States, particularly because they were afraid of this ailment. We've come a long way on some of these things, but the fact of the matter is, those stigmas still exist. They still exist for so many people. Having gratitude in your heart is also about having mercy towards people who are suffering. The fact of the matter is, we're all here. We're all able to make it because someone helped us along the way. When I think about the people that have stepped up in my life and made it possible for me to do some of the things that I love, have a livelihood, be supported in ministry, as I'm going through my master's in communication at Cal Baptist, and as I have the love and affection of an incredible person, a wonderful, amazing girl, and amazing family that's there for me. As I think about all the things that I'm thankful for, as that Thanksgiving holiday is right around the corner, it's just a reminder that a lot of the advantages that I have in this life, they're not my accomplishments alone. So many people have stepped forward and done amazing things for me. And in order for me to have gratitude, true gratitude, I've got to have an outlook of mercy on others who need help. And I think ministry demands it. When I look at the way Jesus treated these people who were openly crying out in desperation for Jesus' pity, he imparted on them healing. He didn't check his schedule. He didn't check to see what kinds of, funds were available to him. He didn't charge them. The healing that Jesus performed that day was free. And we're going to see in a second that it was free to the one who got it, to the one who was truly grateful for it. It was also free to the 9 people who just never came back and said thank you. I worry sometimes that churches have lost this, that we've forgotten this. That when people come seeking our help and our hope, it's not a business transaction. We don't help people because we got a committee together and found out that they were worthy. How can we model gratitude if that's the way we operate? And where is the ministry of Jesus Christ in that? Just imagine for a second if you went to the altar, or you went to a friend, or you went to wherever you did, and said that sinner's prayer and acknowledged the fact that you needed Jesus in your life. Imagine that if the person or pastor or whoever said, okay, well, we got to figure out if you're worthy of this salvation. Would any of us measure up? I don't think we would. So why on earth does church after church after church select who's going to receive mercy from the church as if they're a college football team and they're being ranked in a poll system? Now, I know what some of you are going to say, Josh, that's pretty harsh. We can't solve all of our community's problems. We can't solve all the world's problems. And to that, I simply just say, you're right. We can't solve every problem. I know at Christian Community Church of Fullerton, we can't solve every problem. The fact of the matter is, I've been pastor there for 10 years, and we've had a lot of people come through our doors, ask for assistance and help. And I'd be lying to you if I said we helped every single one of them. And I'd also be telling the truth that if we helped as many that came, we wouldn't be around. We wouldn't have any money to operate. So understand what I'm saying. I'm not trying to lay a guilt trip on you. But I am saying this. Don't let the inability to help everyone stop you and or your ministry from helping someone. And let's stop comparing the level of people's desperation and need to whether or not we think they're a worthy candidate for hope. All 10 of these lepers were healed by Jesus. One of them, 1 in 10, 10%, a failing grade, came back to thank him. And Jesus didn't rip the healing away from the other 9. He still healed them. And I am telling you, if you are a Christian today and you are actively helping out in your world, you'll be lucky if 1 in 10 people really honestly say thanks. Join your church. Get involved. The fact of the matter is, it might even be less than that. But we've still got to do it. Because we're not concerned with the ROI of salvation. We're not concerned with getting the thank you card from everyone we help. What we should be concerned about is modeling our ministry after Jesus. And Jesus hears them, and he heals them, and he sends them to rejoin society. And we should be looking at those who need our help. The person who's sick, the drug addict, the undocumented immigrant, maybe even that annoying family member that never seems to get it. Fill in the blank. The hungry, the homeless, the brokenhearted, the prisoner. We've got to be willing to receive these people in the same way that Jesus did. And in many ways, whether or not they think us is inconsequential. If we're truly grateful for all the things that God has done, we'll stop trying to earn God's salvation by being holy. We'll start living lives of gratitude and thankfulness because he's made us so. Thankfully, one of them did get it. It says one of them, when he saw he was healed, came back praising God in a loud voice. He threw himself at Jesus' feet and thanked him. And guess what he was? He was a Samaritan. That tells us that Jesus was there. He was healing the Jews and the Samaritans alike. Amazing. I'm going to tell you something that's absolutely true based on what we know sociologically about the people living in that day. Many of the Jews in Jesus' day would have looked at that Samaritan, looked at the other Jewish lepers, would have given favorable treatment to the Jewish lepers. And the fact of the matter is, if we're really honest, we do that far too much in church. And I want to say something to those of you who may not be believers. I want to apologize on behalf of our churches for sometimes missing the boat on that. That is not an attitude that's reflective of the gratitude of God doing incredible things through us. It's not the gratitude that churches should have for serving their communities. All too often, the person who comes in the nice clothes, the good manners, well-spoken, good-looking kids, they're talked to a little bit more. They're given a little more preferential treatment than the person who kind of comes in, who smells a little funky, who's wearing kind of some dingy clothes and maybe doesn't have money to put in the plate. Somehow, some way, in so many of our churches, we don't gravitate to asking that person to join. And all too often, we don't make a concerted effort to advertise that those people should come. And that's wrong. And I want to tell you that not every church is like that. If you've had that experience, that's not the experience of every church. Don't give up on going to a church because you were mistreated that one time. Give church another chance. Give us another chance to get it right. And to Christians out there, let's get it right. Let's make our churches truly open to all. Because we don't know where that person is going to come from who hears that message and gets saved. We don't know that. God does, though. God knows the heart. And God doesn't matter if that person is white or black or brown or whatever ethnicity or whatever language. God doesn't care if that person is rich or poor, has all kinds of things that they can bring to the church, or all kinds of things that the church has to do for them. God is first and foremost concerned whether or not we turn to Him for grace, for salvation. That's what it's all about. If we truly believe in a heaven where we're going to spend eternity praising and worshiping God, then we've got to get our minds off the things of this world that keep us from truly reaching out to the distraught and the depressed and the brokenhearted. We've got to get our minds out of that gutter and start getting focused on pulling people out of society's gutters. That's what our focus needs to be. And when it is, I am convinced that we are going to have similar moments where we see salvation come even to those we least expect. And then we'll realize the words, "Rise and go. Your faith has made you well." Jesus healed physically 10 men, 10 people of a horrible disease. But one person was healed spiritually of something even worse and restored to his Creator that day. We are coming upon an opportunity this Thanksgiving, this Christmas, this holiday season. Now, I understand some of the concerns on behalf of Christians out there. I understand that people don't always say Merry Christmas. I understand that some traditions have gone by the way, and I understand that bums you out. If everybody who knows me knows that I am Mr. Christmas, wearing a red shirt tonight. I love Christmas. I love the songs. I love the traditions. I love the decorations. I am not going to have a sour attitude and a sour disposition because some people don't get it. I am going to continue to be grateful and cheerful and festive because I do. I'm going to stop worrying about a perceived war on Christmas, and I'm going to start bringing the gift of Christmas to people. And I'm going to understand that, you know what, maybe 9 out of 10 people will reject that. It'll all be worth it if that one person truly gets the Spirit, truly understands the message. If we want to put, I'm going to use a phrase borrowing a phrase from those who are kind of concerned about this. If you want to put Christ back in Christmas, you don't do it through bumper stickers. You don't do it through media backlash. You don't do it that looking at the person who said happy holidays with a frown and a scowl. You do it with a smile. You do it with love. You do it with charity. You do it because you want to see faith come to those around you. And you're willing to realize that that is going to happen in a world where more people don't get it than do. But we keep our optimism, we keep our hope, we keep our faith alive when one person does, when another person does, and their faith makes them well. At the end of the day, it's all about gratitude. Giving it and receiving it. And understanding that when we do, we truly walk in the footsteps of Jesus. Want to remind you, if you have any comments, questions, concerns about this or any of our Bible studies, have any topic ideas, or maybe want to give us a prayer request, drop me a line at pastorvi@yahoo.com. Thank you guys so much. It's Monday night, 7 p.m. God bless you. Have a great rest of your week, and happy Veterans Day.